Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're examining a significant piece of work titled The Leaderboard Illusion.
Yes, it's a really fascinating study.
It really scrutinizes the growing influence of AI model leaderboards, and it focuses particularly on Chatbot Arena.
Which, as you know, if you follow generative AI, has become a major reference point.
Absolutely.
Well,
You see it cited everywhere: media, industry discussions, even academia. It's known for its user-driven ranking system, right? Pairwise comparisons of anonymous models.
exactly. That gives it this appearance of being very dynamic, very open, people pitting models against each other directly.
It definitely has that appeal. It feels practical, like a real-world test compared to maybe some static benchmarks.
And its responsiveness, to how quickly models are changing and the kinds of things users ask. That's certainly part of why it took off.
Precisely. But as this study points out, relying too heavily on just one leaderboard, well, it comes with risks.
Goodhart's law comes to mind, doesn't it?
It does. When a measure becomes the target, it stops being a good measure. And this research really digs into that.
So they did a pretty extensive analysis, right?
Oh yeah, 15 months, January 2024 to April 2025. Looked at 2 million battles, 42 providers, something like 243 models.
Wow, that's a lot of data.
It is. And their goal was basically to ask, just how reliable are these Chatbot Arena rankings, really?
And their findings, well, they certainly make you think twice about taking those rankings purely at face value.
They really do. The study flags things like undisclosed private testing, selective reporting of scores.
And major differences in who gets access to the data from the arena itself, plus how models get removed, sometimes quietly.
Okay, let's start with that first one, the undisclosed private testing and selective reporting. What did the researchers find there?
Well, they uncovered evidence of an unpublicized policy. It seems Chatbot Arena allowed a small group of, let's call them preferred providers, to test multiple model versions privately.
Preferred providers. Like who?
The study specifically mentions Meta, Google, and Amazon as key beneficiaries.
And we're talking a lot of private testing.
The scale is quite something. For instance, Meta apparently tested 27 private variants before Llama 4 went public.
27.
Yep. And Google tested 10 before Gemma 3. Compare that to smaller players, like the startup Reka. They only saw one private variant from them.
That's a huge difference.
It is. And Meta even tested an extra 16 private vision models on top of that during the period they looked at.
So how does this actually affect the rankings? The study talks about a best-of-end strategy.
Right. So think about it. If you test, say, 20 versions of your model privately, find the one that happens to score highest on the arena's metrics, and only release that one.
You're essentially cherry-picking your best result.
Exactly. And the study shows through simulations how this violates a core assumption of the Bradley-Terry model that Chatbot Arena uses.
Which assumption is that?
The assumption of unbiased sampling. If you're pre-selecting the winner from a hidden pool, the sample entering the public leaderboard isn't unbiased anymore. It gives those providers a systematic edge.
The study had figures showing this, right?
Yeah, figures 7 and 8 are quite telling. Figure 7 shows pretty clearly that the more private variants you test, the higher your expected arena score for the model you eventually release.
So more shots on goal, basically.
Kind of. And figure 8 illustrates how a whole family of models that might, on average, be weaker could actually end up ranking higher than another family just by using this extensive private testing strategy.
That really undermines the idea of a level playing field.
It does. And interestingly, the researchers found no sign of academic labs doing this kind of private testing.
Suggesting they maybe didn't know about the policy or just didn't have the resources.
Probably a bit of both. It raises questions about access. And, anecdotally, the way top spots on the leaderboard sometimes change hands very quickly between the big players, OpenAI, xAI, Google. It kind of fits with the idea they might be testing multiple things concurrently behind the scenes.
So this private testing, it casts a shadow on the fairness right from the start.
It certainly raises serious questions about transparency and whether the public rankings truly reflect the overall state of AI development.
Okay, so that's the private testing. But the study also mentioned big disparities in data access from the arena itself. How does that work?
Yeah, this is another major factor. It's not just about the private testing edge. It's also about who gets the most data from the public comparisons happening on the platform.
And its access is really uneven.
Extremely uneven, according to the research. And it's driven by a few things. First, as we just discussed, testing more private variants means you collect more prompt data during that phase.
Right. More models running, even privately, means more user interactions collected.
Exactly. Figure 6 shows Meta, Google, and Amazon leading the pack there. The researchers even ran an experiment with Cohere just by testing 3 variants instead of 1. Cohere increased their prompt collection share from about 6% to over 19%.
Wow. And then there's the sampling rate.
Right. That's basically how often the Arena system decides to show a particular model to users for comparison. And again, huge differences.
Like how different?
Figure 5 shows OpenAI and Google models sometimes hit a maximum daily sampling rate of up to 34%.
Okay.
Compare that to some others, like Allen AI, which maxed out around 3.4%. That's a tenfold difference in exposure.
Which means a tenfold difference in the amount of feedback data they collect.
Pretty much. More exposure equals more data. Then there's this issue they call silent deprecation.
Silent deprecation, meaning models just disappear.
Or their sampling rate gets slashed dramatically, yeah. They identified 205 models that seemed to be effectively removed or sidelined this way, but without meeting the official stated criteria for deprecation that Chatbot Arena had published.
So not transparently retired based on performance.
Apparently not always. Only 47 models were officially marked as deprecated during that time. This silent removal, well, it further impacts data collection for those models.
That seems problematic for tracking progress reliably. And there was one more factor.
Yes, the API support. Providers who host their models using their own API get 100% of the prompts submitted to their model.
Okay.
But models hosted via third-party platforms often only get about 20% of that data. Another built-in advantage for some.
So when you add all that up, the private tests, the higher sampling, the silent deprecations, the API advantage, what's the combined effect?
It's pretty staggering. The study estimates that just 4 providers, OpenAI, Google, Meta, and Anthropic, collectively gathered about 62.8% of all the data from Chatbot Arena during the study period.
63%. Just 4 companies.
Yeah. And get this, that's apparently 68 times more data than the top academic and nonprofit labs combined. Figure 4 really visualizes this skew.
That's quite an imbalance. And does having all this Arena data actually help models rank better on the Arena?
The research suggests it does. They ran experiments where they trained models using varying amounts of Arena data.
Yeah.
They saw win rates on a specific benchmark, Arena Hard, jump from around 23.5% to almost 50% just by increasing the proportion of Arena data in the training mix from 0 to 70%.
So training on the test, essentially.
It leans that way, yes. And they point out this is probably a conservative estimate because it doesn't account for the extra data some get via private APIs.
Which creates this kind of feedback loop, right? More data leads to better Arena performance, which leads to more visibility, maybe more data.
Potentially, yes. It risks creating a cycle where models get really good at winning on Chatbot Arena, but maybe not necessarily better at general real-world tasks.
That brings us to the data itself. What did this study say about the characteristics of the prompts on Chatbot Arena? Is it representative?
Well, one key finding is that the data isn't static. It changes over time. They observed long-term shifts. For example, increases in prompts related to math, coding, and multi-turn conversations. Also, shifts in language distribution.
What kind of language shifts?
Figure 11 showed English usage actually decreasing over time, while languages like Chinese, Russian, and Korean became more common in the prompts.
Interesting. So the test itself is evolving. What else?
A really important point is prompt redundancy. There's a lot of duplication.
People asking the same things over and over?
Or very similar things, yeah. Figure 12 shows monthly duplication rates, and there's more detail in an appendix. They found that, on average, over 20% of prompts each month were duplicates of prompts seen before.
20%.
Yes, peaking at over 26% in March 2025. What this implies is that if you have access to the most recent Arena data,
you have a better chance of predicting what kinds of prompts will show up next because many might be repeats.
Precisely. It gives a competitive advantage for tuning your model to the immediate test set.
Beyond repetition, are there other unique things about Arena prompts?
The study mentions a few. There's a 12,000 character limit, which might cut off longer, more complex inputs.
Okay.
The user base also tends to lean towards developers and technically savvy folks, so you might get more coding or technical questions than average.
Right, not necessarily typical consumer usage.
Exactly. And they even found weird topic imbalances in one snapshot, like tons of Star Trek questions, but 0 about Chaucer. It just highlights that the Arena data has its own specific flavor.
Which might be quite different from the data a model would encounter in, say, a commercial chatbot application.
Definitely. So optimizing purely for Arena success might lead to overfitting to these specific characteristics, potentially at the expense of broader capabilities.
Okay, so we've covered private testing, data access disparities, and the nature of the data itself. The last big area the study looked at was the impact of model deprecation on the leaderboard's reliability.
Yes, this ties back to the underlying statistical model, the Bradley-Terry, or BT model.
Which relies on certain assumptions being met, as you mentioned earlier.
Right. One key assumption for the BT model to work properly, especially for ensuring transitivity, that idea if A beats B and B beats C, then A should beat C, is that the evaluation conditions need to be relatively stable over time.
But you just said the prompts and tasks on Arena are evolving?
Exactly. The prompt's categories shift, the languages change, and, crucially, models get deprecated. They stop being evaluated against these newer, evolving conditions.
So a model score might be based on comparisons made under older conditions.
Potentially, yes. If a model fought most of its battles early on and then got deprecated, its final score reflects its performance against that older distribution of tasks and competitors.
How does that affect its ranking compared to newer models evaluated under current conditions?
The study argues it makes the comparison unreliable. They have a simulation in Figure 14 showing this. A deprecated model's rank becomes unstable and less meaningful compared to a situation where all models were continuously evaluated against the changing tasks.
So deprecation breaks the consistency assumption. What else?
It also impacts another critical requirement for the BT model, the need for a sufficiently interconnected comparison graph.
Meaning all the models need to have been compared against each other, directly or indirectly.
Yes. To get a unique and stable ranking, you need that network of wins and losses connecting everyone. If models get deprecated quickly, or if certain groups of models rarely compete against others, the graph can become sparse or disconnected.
And a sparse graph is bad for the BT model.
Very bad. As researchers pointed out decades ago, like Ford Jr. in 1957, if you can split the models into groups that haven't really competed against each other, you can't reliably rank them all on a single scale.
And the study found evidence of this happening in Chatbot Arena.
Well, Figure 13 shows just how many models were deprecated over the period studied, and Figure 15 uses simulations to demonstrate that this kind of sparse graph, resulting from frequent deprecation, directly harms the accuracy of the final rankings.
Okay, so taken together, the private testing, the data inequality, the data characteristics, the impact of deprecation, it paints a pretty concerning picture of the leaderboard's reliability.
It certainly suggests the need for caution when interpreting the rankings as definitive measures of model quality or progress.
Given all these issues, did the researchers propose any solutions? How could Chatbot Arena be improved?
Yes, they put forward 5 specific recommendations aimed at restoring trust and scientific integrity.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, prohibit score retraction. Once a model is submitted and scored, that score should stand. And crucially, they say providers must publicly disclose the scores of all the private variants they tested.
That directly tackles the best of N cherry picking.
Exactly. Full transparency on all attempts.
Makes sense. What's number 2?
Establish clear, transparent limits on the number of private variants a provider can test before a public launch. No more testing dozens in secret.
Level the playing field somewhat. Okay, third.
Implement fairer sampling methods. Instead of potentially favoring big providers or popular models, use methods that actively prioritize getting comparisons for under-evaluated models or pairs where the outcome is uncertain, high variance.
So focus the comparison budget more intelligently.
Right. They mention revisiting an active sampling idea the arena organizers themselves had previously considered.
Got it. Fourth recommendation.
More transparency around deprecation. Don't just silently remove models. Link retirement clearly to objective criteria, maybe performance falling below a certain percentile within its category, like proprietary versus open source, after its score has stabilized.
So clear rules for when models are retired based on performance or maybe utility.
Yes, and stratified by model type to make it fair.
And the fifth recommendation.
This one's pretty simple. Disclose the provider identities for all models on the leaderboard. No more anonymous entries, at least not hiding the source provider.
Increase accountability. Okay, those seem like concrete steps.
They are. They address the core issues of hidden advantages, data imbalances, and lack of transparency uncovered in the research.
So to wrap things up, this deep dive into the Leaderboard Illusion study really suggests that, well, some deliberate gamification by a few big players,
combined with certain preferential policies, perhaps unintentional at first, but still impactful,
have seriously compromised the scientific validity and the overall reliability of the Chatbot Arena rankings as a neutral benchmark.
It really highlights how difficult but how important it is to get evaluation right in AI. We need fair, transparent methods to measure real progress, not just optimization for one specific, potentially flawed leaderboard.
Absolutely. Which leaves us with a pretty big question, doesn't it? Given these findings, how should we as a community be using leaderboards like Chatbot Arena?
Can we trust them as indicators of true capability? Or do we need to fundamentally rethink our evaluation strategies, maybe look towards more diverse methods?
That's definitely something for all of us to think about. What other ways can we get a more reliable picture of AI progress? It's worth adding that the researchers did share these findings and recommendations with the Chatbot Arena organizers.
So there's hope, perhaps, for some positive changes down the line. And, we should probably acknowledge the effort that went into creating the arena in the first place.
True, the intention was likely to provide a useful community resource. But as this study shows, constant vigilance and adaptation are needed to keep these kinds of benchmarks meaningful and fair.
Indeed.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.